All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Tech Exchange Seminar Series. I'm Ranga Settler. I'm one of the Associate Directors of the Institute for AI and Data Science. I'm the Associate Director for Community Engagement. This particular series is primarily motivated by this objective of making people across the university community aware of the various AI-related activities that are happening on campus. It's very hard for researchers across the campus to know what is happening. And by featuring these speakers and making that aware, we are also, people can participate online, and we are recording this so that the recordings can be shared by the speakers themselves with potentially other collaborators, as well as we will sort of make it available to anybody that wants to review it. The idea is that we bring together some collaboration opportunities for researchers across the campus. When they see other researchers doing something and they feel like they can contribute to it, you have this serendipitous meeting of minds, and hopefully that will lead to increased research activity across the campus. So that's one of the primary reasons. Also, it's important for us to showcase the fact that AI today pervades every field of research, and how we have researchers doing really fascinating things in various domains. So that's sort of the preamble. We have two speakers. It's usually two half-hour talks, and our first speaker today is Rachael Hageman Blair, and she's one of the associate directors of IAD as well for education. And I'll let you sort of say whatever else you want to say about your introduce yourself, and we have a second speaker that will follow Rachael and Rufan. So I will start with Rachael.
Okay, yeah, got it. So great. Thank you so much for coming. I see so many familiar faces in the audience. It's really exciting. And today, in the spirit of trying to, find collaborations and introduce a little bit about my research, I have kind of an overview of some different projects that I work on that relate to network optimization. So I'm going to show you a lot of pictures today. Okay, so I'm going to start here with a diagram, which I really like. This is what I think about a lot. And what you see here are kind of these scaffolding layers of things, really well defined right now by multi-omics data, but we can think about this in general. And what we really know is, of course, there are these layers. This is not working, but oops. Okay, there are layers. And this is a great quote. If you truly want to understand something, try to change it. So a lot of my work centers on trying to understand what optimal perturbations to make to drive a system to a desired state. So that's where I'm going to go with this today. So I have ultimately a few different styles network here. This would be talking about the metabolic network a little bit today. Gene regulation, and the protein-protein interaction network. We're not going to talk about that today, but there's also genotype-phenotype networks and just lots of things that you can model with networks. They provide really flexible mathematical frameworks for doing simulation and understanding biological phenomena. So with the short amount of time I have today, I'm going to actually just kind of gloss over some of these. I'll start with some preliminary so we're all kind of on the same page, and I'll get into the mathematical frameworks. And I want to talk just a moment just to tell you what it was that we did related to network integration. So specific to the tumor microenvironment, I'm really going to kind of focus today, just kind of introduce this, and then anyone who wants to talk to me after, happy to chat. But we're kind of going to get into the optimization piece, which is where a lot of my research is right now. So let's start with the mathematical models. This is an example, the top one, which again, this one's not working. So the top plot here is actually a deterministic model. It is modeled by ordinary differential equations. And so yeah, to Ranga's point, my background is actually in math. So I used to think about ODEs and PDEs quite a bit. So we have a deterministic system, and we can think about it as a dynamical system, or we can think about it as a steady state system. The simplicity of the steady state system is that we have a large linear system to look at as opposed to a complex dynamical system where you need a lot of parameters to be specified. The second piece here is where I spend a lot of time, probabilistic graphical models. So the types of models that I work with relate to Bayesian networks, in particular because we can make important inferences with them. And we're going to talk a little bit today about probabilistic reasoning, which is the underpinning of the optimization that I consider. Okay, so let's start with the metabolites. Okay, this is an example of a toy metabolic model. And what you see is it's really quite simple. Mass balance means that, you know, we have a system where we have things being used up and things being produced, and everything has to balance out. So this is what it looks like. These phis actually represent different fluxes, and some of you may be familiar with the general paradigm of flux balance analysis. We're going to kind of get there. But this doesn't look too complicated, does it? I mean, we have differential equations, but it's a small system. But if I look at each one of those phis, it's complicated because they're all determined by these kinetic constants, which we don't really know what those values are. We can't measure them in many, many cases. So this is just classic Michaelis-Menten kinetics, but it's very hard to model dynamical systems, even if we do have dynamical data. So this is a picture of a bigger picture where I showed you before, where each one of these equations represents one of those fluxes that you saw. And again, we think about them with respect to dynamics or steady state. In the dynamical system, we're interested in tracking the concentrations over time. In steady state, we're interested in flux estimation. But each one of these reactions has a catalyst, an enzyme, which can either inhibit the reaction, enhance it, et cetera. And so a lot of people think about, you know, when you think about drug targets or you think about other interventions, gene therapy, which of these you want to kind of push on to get a desired state, whether that be, you know, I'm talking like cancer, very specific example, but we can talk about some other simpler examples soon. So this is a hard problem. And a lot of people work in this flux balance analysis and they consider, you know, knockout experiments. That's the beauty of a mathematical model. It's actually that we can use it to do computational experiments. We call those in silico experiments. And they can guide experimental research, effectively accelerate it, right? Because we can give good ideas on what to change, et cetera. So a lot of folks just work in this space and they kind of push on things and see what happens and, you know, try to make something good. The issue that I like to think about is the fact that each one of these enzymes they don't work in isolation. So there's a whole other branch of mathematical modeling, which relates to the gene regulatory network, okay? And we can think there's proteins and stuff too, but we're just going to think about genetic regulation here. These things are interconnected. And so whenever we think about our classic examples where we press on one enzyme and see what happens, we're not taking into account the fact that there's an underlying structure for the regulatory network. So that's what I've been thinking about for many years. And if you really want to get deeper into this, there's genetic underpinnings to the genetic regulation of this network as well. So this cascade here is called genotype-phenotype inference. So within 10 minutes, I've introduced 3 different models, but they're all related. They're all interconnected. Okay. And they talk to each other. So on this side, I've got my metabolic model, and this time I have a causal graphical model. I say causal because we have this genetic data that we use in special populations. So, but these things kind of sit on top of each other, and a lot of my work relates to the integration of these systems, okay? This gives us a tremendous amount of predictive capabilities because we can think about these computational experiments and expanding them to perturb or change either the genetic components or to understand how it might map to a different population. We can also look at enzyme control. And we can also think about signaling networks, which kind of cascade into this. So there's just a lot of opportunity with these toy models. One challenge is that they're really from different paradigms. All right. So I'm going to kind of talk for a moment here about the different paradigms in the analysis that we classically do. With the metabolic model, I've worked a lot in dynamical systems. It's exciting, but we can only do really smaller things. The metabolic models that we have today are genome scale. So I'm working with one right now for plant, which is 1,700 reactions. That's a lot of reactions. So when we think about that, certainly we can't go dynamic. We simply don't have any idea what those kinetic parameters would even look like or how to represent things. So we do it like this. We think about maximizing, and I can't highlight, but CT theta, that is an objective function. We want to maximize. In the plant, for example, we want to grow, but we also have a defense, so it's actually balanced. For a bacteria like E. coli, we usually have a biomass that we can specify, and a lot of people have done really great research in this area and made these models available to use in publicly available databases. So what we're after is phi. Phi are the fluxes, and E is the stoichiometric matrix, which specifies the reaction map. And essentially, we optimize that first equation subject to the constraints of the second and third. It's just a constrained optimization problem. There's a lot of different ways to solve it. You can go after a single solution. You can do flux variability analysis, and there's a lot of opportunities here to think about those models. Yeah.
It's linear programming.
Yeah, it's linear programming. Yeah, you solve it like that. Yep. What?
It should be easy to solve. Relatively.
Yeah, it's a big space, right? And for the genome scale model, so I typically work with the flux variability analysis, which gives you that range. But yeah, there's been a lot of work in that. So the other model that I use a lot is the Bayesian network. And if this is a plug for my summer course, I teach a summer course in Bayesian networks. Really what we have here is a paradigm which is fundamentally different than the LP programming. And we've got a joint distribution of variables. Okay, and we model that using conditional probabilities. Now there's a lot of assumptions here, which I've kind of written in this space, which allow us to do this. It allows us to factor this high dimensional joint probability distribution into compact factor form. Okay, this is really convenient and something that we need in order to make inferences. This is a little example of the two components that come into a graphical model of this type. One is a structure, okay, which sometimes has to be learned from the data. Sometimes it's known, or a mixture thereof. Notice I have the word Bayesian here, so we can also learn from the data together with our prior knowledge. These are little tables that have burglary, earthquake, and alarm. An alarm goes off. Okay, the question is it a burglary or an earthquake? And so when we think about this famous toy example, we have to describe the second component, not just the relationship here, but the probability tables, the conditional probability tables, which underpin these. Okay, so there is a relationship here, and those also can be learned from data. They can be pre-specified or a balance of those two things. So that's what we're thinking about. And when we model things like a Bayesian network, one of the joys of working in this paradigm is that we can enter, once we have our network and we have our parameterization, we can actually look at making what we call probabilistic queries. Probabilistic queries are essentially like, okay, I've got this set, and now I want to make some queries, like if I change one of these things in my network, how do the marginal probabilities change? How do the conditional probabilities change, et cetera, et cetera? I can do many, many queries. So you can probably understand why that's an attractive option. The other thing with this piece not only can we enter evidence and query about how things change, we can do what's called partial reasoning. Okay, so that means, like, when you have like a classifier or a regression, your classic machine learning, you have this model and you have new data come in, you put the new data in, you make the prediction, right? So that new data had better be a full profile of the observations or the variables that you have data on, right? I mean, we can have missing data, we can have other things. This is different. This is fundamentally different. And that's one of the high points is we have this network and parameterization. I don't need to come in with a full set of variables. I can come in with just a couple key points because I have the underlying distribution completely modeled. And I can use that to update my, we call it belief, about the other variables in the data set. This sounds a lot like what I talked about on the first slide. If you make a change or you have some information, you want to see, am I going to be at a state that is desirable, or more generally, what kind of state will I be at? So this is an important ingredient to our work. Okay, so I just want to show you, this was the one I'm going to skip over. Again, happy to chat later. We've done a lot of things here where we have integrated metabolic networks and gene regulatory networks together, and which sounds, I mean, the pictures look easy, right? But actually, the one is completely a probabilistic framework. The other is a completely mathematical framework. So the way that we do end up fusing those two things are through the constraints of the constraint optimization problem of flux balance analysis. In particular, we've looked at making some perturbations to different transcription factors using belief propagation or probabilistic reasoning to predict the system-wide effects and bringing those to bear on the flux balance analysis. So we've done this with some very specific simulations, but also we've looked at drug repositories and single-cell RNA data in that realm. So that's one kind of application. The other application that I want to kind of expose you to relates to optimizing targets. And this is something that we think about a lot. I'll give you the plan example again, since that's an active project. My collaborator in the biological sciences wants to overproduce the secondary metabolite. It's like called a terpenoid. It's useful in cancer drugs and other things. So the plant can only make so much. So there's a lot of interest in doing that. So one important problem is what targets, because she can make some targets, what targets should she try to increase production in this pathway? Okay, so we think about that. We can think of an initial state, which just is our usual foxglove plan as we know it. And then a target state, which would be something that's a place that we want to be. We want to be accelerating production in that pathway. Or more plainly, you can think of human examples where you have something healthy, disease, there's lots of spaces you would want to drive a network to. And so this is the problem that we're thinking about. And the way that we have approached this is by using networks, machine learning, and optimization together. We've talked a little bit about network propagation. That's why I'm going to skip over that. Actually, we've talked about belief probabilistic reasoning. Network control, network propagation is related to the probabilistic reasoning I talked about earlier. Essentially, you think about a social network. I think we can all relate to social networks. How does influence spread through a network? Well, there's a lot of algorithms to estimate that. These are the algorithms we use are more specific to biological networks, but we can propagate information through a network and go between steady states. And this is something, that we want to do. We want to try to understand. Now, the belief propagation I talked about earlier, the probabilistic reasoning, that's beautiful. And those are strict probabilities and everything that a statistician wants to see. These are not, but they give us more flexibility. We can work with graphs that are undirected, directed, or partially directed. So we've kind of started with this paradigm. Okay, we have a couple of methods. I'm just going to show you some pictures. couple of methods that we've worked on over the years. IGPON is one of them. It looks like I'm missing an important picture here. No, I don't have it here. Okay. Okay. Well, IGPON is one of the things that we use. And essentially what we're trying to do is figure out what those specific perturbations should be. We take our network structure problem and we think about our initial state and our steady state that we want to be at. And we actually frame this as a supervised learning problem. Okay, if we vectorize those states and look at their difference, we're actually able to frame it quite nicely. So IGPON gave us a way to do that. And we've recently improved upon this. We have a paper just accepted where we attack this supervised learning problem as a subset selection problem. Okay, so we use sparse regression and it's guided by the sensitivity matrix. So another technique that we use that is related to that is NULSP. And NULSP stands for Network Optimization via Lasso-based Sparse Propagation. It's a mouthful, so we call it NULSP. Essentially what we have in the top corner here is I have a network with an initial state and a target state. And from this, we end up with a static network structure. That's my dynamical system. I can actually coarsen that to a static network. There's techniques for doing that, very well defined. And on that column B, I've got my biological system, I've got my static representation. This guy here, this little color block is the key. Okay. Now, for those of you with the math backgrounds, you know that if you want to think about how things change in a dynamical system, you need to look at the Jacobian matrix, right? The matrix of partial derivatives. So that's impossible to do in this case because we're working with these genome scale models. So we use something called a sensitivity matrix. The sensitivity matrix is well defined. I'm going to do a little bit of hand waving here. And it can be computed explicitly with some parameterization. And this is the equation that we solve. This is our casting of our unsupervised network optimization problem into a more simple supervised problem where we're looking at the difference between the target and initial state, and S, which is our sensitivity matrix, plays the role of our roadmap. Okay, that's going to tell me how things change with respect to other things in my matrix. Okay, so this was very effective. And we use Lasso to solve that. And I'll just kind of show you some of the things that we did. I'll just highlight this one. One application we looked at was the biomodels database, which contains over 100 biological systems and pathways from different organisms, different diseases, et cetera. They're all dynamical systems. This is beautiful. So we bring them all into MATLAB and we look at them and we do simulations with them. And what we do is we simulate that dynamical system, we do a knockout in the system, and we look at the state that it goes to. So we have an initial state and a target state. And now we bring this into our algorithm and we try to reverse engineer from the data what is the optimal target. Okay. And our results show that in 3 different types of network representations, which is easy to do for each one of these networks, we're able to identify the target in over 85% of our simulations with these actual biomodels. And we also have a measure, which I didn't show, for control, which says the system is in control, it's going to that target state. But what's really interesting is the last 2 columns. Sometimes we're wrong. Right? Sometimes we're not able to find that optimal perturbation. We know the answer because we have it. We're not able to find it, but we come up with something different. And if we bring those different perturbations into the system, they actually do a pretty good job of controlling the system. So when we're not able to identify that true perturbation, we're able to identify a suitable alternative, which drives our system also into control. Okay. So again, lots of pictures, lots of big themes, and not a ton of detail, but it's a pleasure kind of describing some of these projects. The methodologies that I've talked about use network propagation, which is a very interesting area of research, and machine learning to prioritize targets. And that's essentially what we're trying to do. And when we do this, we're able to do these in silico predictions, which is the goal of systems biology, is to do this. We want to guide experimental research, and we have to do it in a way that is believable, right? We can't, it's very expensive to do these wet lab experiments. We have to get really good at prioritizing targets. And that one isn't so important, but in general, we're able to adopt these to a range of applications. In fact, Sarah's in the audience now. I'm going to talk to her on Thursday about some potential applications about bringing AI into this to kind of pre-specify some priors in our Bayesian networks. So that's my spiel. Thank you for your attention, and happy to answer any questions.
Any questions?
So, Rachel, in those controlled network, what are you trying to optimize? If you can reach your target network, right? So, but what are you trying to optimize for? And how do you know this control path is actually, I don't know, is it feasible or is it practical or is it reality? So what is the thing?
Question, all three of those. Yeah, so what we're trying to optimize is literally, so that outcome variable is the difference between the target and the initial state. So we want that to be as small as possible. So that's our optimization problem. Our roadmap plays the role of the classic model matrix. And what we're trying to find is, number one, a sparse set of genes or whatever it is we're looking at that would put the system as close as possible to that space. So if you think about it as a classic lasso problem, right? So we're trying to infer the betas, right? What betas are non-zero? And we could also consider, I think, down the road, interpreting the beta coefficients. But we have to do the tuning just like we would in a classic supervised learning problem. And so that's what we're after. We're after the betas and those non-zero coefficients. And then sometimes there's more than one. So in practice, one has to think about the feasibility of such experiments. If I give my collaborator a list where I have like ATP or something on the top, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense, right? There's not something that she can readily knock out. So there's a lot of room within this methodology for bringing in some of those feasibility things as constraints within our model. That's one of the beauties of Lasso. But we're not quite, to that space yet, but it's definitely practical in that framework.
So maybe in the spirit of the Tech Exchange seminar series, are there things that you are looking for, for a collaborator, maybe additional application areas or sort of what would be the kind of,
Absolutely. So this is a open call for, I really like to think about network integration. I also work in the area of disease modeling, disease spread and contagion networks. That's another area of interest. And I also work in graph partitioning, community detection, that kind of stuff. So anything network is interesting, both social, but mostly biological. Okay. Thank you, Ranga.
Sure. Thanks. Let's thank Rachel again. Here's a token of our office.
Might have these.
I forget a lot of times, so maybe doing it immediately after every talk. It's
it's on now.
Yeah, our next speaker is Andrew Fan, and maybe you can introduce yourself first, and and then proceed with your talk.
All right. So hello everyone. So my name is Andrew Fan. I am an assistant professor from the civil and environmental engineering. So I also I graduated from Case Western Reserve University, which is the same as our first speaker. And then I did some work at Princeton University. So these are some works of my both stages. So you probably would wonder how a civil engineering or civil and environmental engineering guy is working on the network. So generally speaking, when you look at the infrastructure in the United States, you won't be surprised that there are so many infrastructure systems that they are actually networked systems. For example, I highlight, you probably cannot see here, but I'm just highlighting a few infrastructure systems such as the drinking system, the energy system, the wastewater system, the transportation system, and also the transit system in the United States. These networked systems are actually quite aging, and they cause a lot of problems. The grid here is actually represent the ASCE, the American Society of Civil Engineering grading for the different types of infrastructures. Our infrastructures are really at the ending age of its service life, of their service life. So because for me, I'm more focused on this so-called network types of systems. We all know that when the system becomes a network, the behavior of the network is different from its component, which means that the failure of a component of the infrastructure will not impact the system at the same level. So some components are kind of like important. Sometimes of the components are maybe like lead to like less impacts. So by leveraging the AI solutions, my research is actually trying to target to solve different engineering problems. But when I solve these problems, what I found is that these engineering problems can be fundamentally solved by new techniques or methods that developed in network science, which is actually quite amazing. I will use a few previous projects as a background of today's presentation. For example, in one project, we are trying to see if we can predict the leak in the large-scale water system based on a few sensors. So essentially, as you can see, in the network states, it's basically like we want to estimate the network status based on a limited number of observations. And naturally, there are two challenges here. First is that where we should place the sensors, where we should put the sensors in the network so that we have the capability to monitor the system performance maximally. And the second is that once we get the data from the sensors, how we can use the observation to infer the network status so that we can know where the leak happens or what is the issue that caused the abnormal of the sensing data. So in this study, we are trying to develop an algorithm called clustering then localization semi-supervised learning. So what our solution is that if we are able to cluster the network into different partitions, we are able to put a sensor in each of the partition, and then we are able to use minimal number of sensors to detect the leak scenarios, and also we can have like a whole system monitoring coverage. So this algorithm essentially is not that difficult. It's basically we are trying to put the k-means clustering algorithm into the network. So so not like we are trying to clustering the tabular data. We are clustering the nodes with the consideration of the graph structure. So this is one of my previous projects that how we think the system as a network. The second challenge in the civil engineering is maintenance. Like we have so much large-scale infrastructure systems, and when there is a nature happens, there are multiple components failure of the infrastructure systems. Imagine here I'm representing a 100 flooding scenario of the Cleveland, and you can see the flooding depths will impact the connectivity of the traffic network. So one thing is that when we have a large-scale components failures, how we should prioritize our maintenance sequence so that we can maximally recover the system performance. That's the key idea. Like, so it's essentially a optimization problem, but what we are thinking about is optimizing over the networks. In this project, what we are trying to do is combine the graph neural network with deep reinforcement learning to achieve an optimal decision making for the maintenance. Because the key idea here is that when we think about the deep reinforcement learning, it gives a good capability to find the optimal decisions on a high action consequence space dimension. And on the other side, if we use a graph neural network to as a backbone of the deep reinforcement learning, it can help us have a better capability to digest the information of the system, because these infrastructure systems can be naturally represented as a graph, and it has a better capability to understand the topology compared to traditional neural network, like multi-layer neural networks. So we decided to use this graph neural network as a backbone of our deep reinforcement learning. And what we are surprised to find that the optimal solution is actually better than traditional optimization algorithm, such as the genetic algorithm or simple like betweenness centrality. If you are familiar with networks, you probably have heard about the centrality, which is an importance index of the edge in the network. So it is also outperform like if we try to like compress the network into a single vector representation and use normal neural networks. So graph neural network in this case is actually quite powerful to digest the information of the system. Lastly is the third project I want to introduce is about predicting the remaining life of the infrastructure component, or what we can also think of as a failure probability. So because the different components are installed at different times, they are experiencing different situations, they are deteriorating at different speed. So in this way, we collaborated with the Cleveland Water Department, and we are trying to predict the remaining life. We are trying to predict the failure probability of the pipes that are used for drinking water. But what we found is that if we think it as a network, they share some geospatial correlations of this failure probability. So which means that the pipes located as a similar location and connected with each other, they kind of like share similar degradation rate. And that's why when we think of this as a network, we have a better capability to predict the edge, the status, or to predict the degradation status of the edges. So as you can see, all these three projects, we try to develop some new algorithms in network science or graph learning to help us solve some engineering problems. But when we continue working on that, I realized that when we are thinking about the machine learning to help us to solve this challenge, a key question is that how we represent the system. Remember, like if we can represent the system or we can represent our target in a reasonable and accurate way, we always can get a better result when we apply the different when we're trying to different to solve different problems. So I'm sure if you are working on the machine learning, you are also very familiar with this architecture that we first have our target. We use either neural network or some other methods to represent our target. And we probably will have a decoder which that we can transform our higher dimensional representations to our final targets. Either it is a classification problem, or it is a regression problem, or it's like decision-making problem. But so my next project here is really focused, hey, if we are looking at the infrastructure system, how can we get a better representation of the system so we can facilitate the downstream applications? And when we look at the infrastructure systems, we have a kind of like fancy name, we call it spatially embedded network. The reason we call it spatially embedded because when we think about the road networks or water networks or power networks, they are kind of like constrained by the spatial environment. They are constrained by the population distribution. They are constrained by the topographic change. They probably will also constrained by the demands of different people. So the topology and the structure of these networks, they are actually constrained by its spatial environment. And if we want to better represent these types of network, we really cannot ignore the spatial environment we cannot ignore the environment that this system embedded, which means that which means that we are not only looking at the structure or topology of the systems, we are also looking at all the other like social economic data, the elevation change, the soil types, these types of information. So if we look at if we go to details of the network, let's take the road network as an example. We can think that the network is defined by different features. For example, for the node, we first have the position features. The position feature is simply the coordinate of the nodes. We also have the node regional features, which is a two-dimensional data, which is the area that is centered on the node. It's probably in the real world, it's probably the topographic change of the soil, of the elevation. We also have some specific node point feature, because if this node is located in a community, we will know the population, the social economic data, the incomes, the poverty rates, features like that. And also, if we traverse through the edges, we also have the edge features. It also can be a different types of elevation change, because when we build the roads and we build the water pipes, we always consider the real elevation change. If the change is too much, we usually don't build the road. So anyway, so basically, when we think about that the spatially embedded networks, especially in the real world, we realize that we really need multimodal capability to digest this information, because different features or different types of information, they are very likely to have different dimensions. So our solution here is that when we work, when we try to develop a so-called generic multimodal graph convolutional neural network architecture. The philosophy of this architecture is that we're trying to combine the domain knowledge into the graph learning process. So the philosophy is that if we're trying to find a better way to let the neural network to learn the representation easily. For example, in here, we grouped the different types of features into different models, and then we use the shallow sub-neural networks to digest this information, and we combine all this digested information in the end. So the main motivation of this architecture is that if we think the neural network as a human or as a student in our class, if we can organize our learning materials and we give a better sequence of the learning materials, the students can have the ability to learn your class better. So in here, what we integrate our domain knowledge here is that we kind of like guide the learning process in the network based on how we group the features. Third, how we guide the message passing in the network learning process. So in here, we are not pre-processing the data. We are actually manipulate the message parsing stage in the graph convolutional neural network. If you are familiar with the graph convolutional neural network, you would know that the key learning part is that how the node feature is transferred to its neighbors, and then the neural network learns from the nodes and also the neighbors of the nodes of the neighbors. So what we really do is that we modify the message passing state process of the neural network, and so that it can consider the both node features, edge features, and also different types of features. We also let the neural network to know, hey, you should compare the node difference rather than the absolute node values. You should also try to follow this important path to learn the information rather than just treat all the neighbors evenly. So we are trying to giving our domain knowledge to the graph neural network. And also because it's so flexible of this modularized design, we also put two variants. One is a so-called regional spatial convolutional neural network that only considers the features of the node, and also the edge spatial graph convolution, which only considers the edges. And we applied this learning algorithm to a so-called edge prediction challenge. So generally, it's not a typical challenge in the engineering domain, but but we think it's a very interesting question in network science. The challenge here is that assuming we know the features of the nodes, can we accurately predict the connection between the nodes, right? So assuming that we know all the spatial environments and we know the features of the node, how can we use the information to predict the connections? And in here, we actually applied it to two types of the real-world systems. The first is the New Jersey Power Network, because we did this project at Princeton. And the New Jersey Power Network, we're trying to learn the connection patterns of the New Jersey Power Network and to let the model predict the topology of the Connecticut Power Network. And also, we try to let the model to learn the Oregon River Network and try to predict the network of California River Network. So the training bed and test bed are fully separated. There is no data leakage issues. And it's actually the results are very promising. So if you can see that when we compare, in this first one, we're trying to predict, we use the training set of the Oregon River Network and predict the river network in California. We got almost like 95% accuracy. So the model is actually learning very well. It's kind of like connect all the nodes accurately. So just to be clear, we know all the nodes information. We know the location of the nodes. We know the surrounding environment of the nodes. The only thing we don't know is which two nodes are connected, like how the nodes are connected. So in here, we are predicting the existence of the edge. And also interesting is that if we look at the river network case, the edge-based graph convolution also achieved a quite real accuracy, meaning that the edge, the river topology is mainly dominated by the features along the edge, such as elevation change. It's not very dominated by the node features, which makes sense because water always flow along the elevation changes. We also compared the model with a graph siege model. The graph siege model in here achieved the lowest accuracy because this is not optimized. We concatenate all the information into a single very long vector and put it to the graph siege model. So it means that we are not teaching the neural network how to learn the stuff. We just let the neural network brutally learn the connections. This is a river network, and also for the power network, we also achieved almost like 88%. But the interesting part is that if you compare the accuracy, the regional graph convolutional neural network becomes the second best model. Meaning that for the power network, it's actually the node importance, the node features is more important because the power network is defined by how many people there. We use the population, we use the population information and also the social economic information as a node features. So it's actually a very interesting part, but I just feel like if we can modularize the learning process of the network, we actually can potentially guide a better way to tell the neural network how to learn the information. We don't want the neural network to brutally learn the information, which is the key motivation of this project. And lastly, I believe I just want to give a quick conclusion. So effective learning, we believe, is a very key step of the downstream applications. The reason we can have a better classification task, we can have a better regression, we can have a better decision making, it really depends on if we can learn the system, if we can digest the system effectively and accurately. And the second thing is that we believe it's just like a trial that we try to integrate our domain knowledge into the design of the neural networks, and we think it kind of like works. But of course, if we have infinite computing power, if we have infinite like time, probably brutally learning can also work. But we always have a limited resources here. And lastly is that I just want to highlight that understanding the network is actually very interesting because it can be connected with different decoders for different applications. In here, we simply add a multi-layer neural network as a decoder for classify the age should be exist or not exist. But we can also decode it as a regression problem. If we integrate into a deep reinforcement learning architecture, it can become a decision-making problem, a decision-making framework. But yeah, that's a key idea of what I'm doing about the networks. And I also worked in the water resources and the environmental engineering part. So my lab is about the urban water systems. We are also trying to find different ways to help a community combating the flooding related hazards, such as the floodings, hurricanes, and extreme drought. And we are trying to improve our understanding in both infrastructure side and nature hazard side, so that in the end, I hope our community can be more safe and kind of like a resilient, something like that. But yeah, thank you very much.
That was a very nice talk. So any questions?
Thank you for the nice talk.
Yeah.
My question is, I guess I have two questions. One is with the accuracy measure you use. Is that capturing the false positives too?
Yes, it's R score. So it's F1 score.
Okay.
Yes. So the accuracy we show there is F1 score because we know the ground truth of the connection. And what we really do is that we assume the network is fully connected. We just firstly assuming the neural net, we just assume that the system network is fully connected, and we classify each edge into 0 or 1. If it is 1, means that they should be connected. If it's 0, we kind of like think it's not connected. So we kind of like compare the prediction results with the ground truth we know, and that's how we get the accuracy.
So in your method, if you kind of think about generalizing this, I guess my question is, are you able to kind of reverse engineer and understand like those things that you are missing, like what attributes or what features that you've modeled are contributing or driving that, if there's some kind of a trend?
That's actually a very great question. Even when we submitted this paper, a few reviewers asked me, why do you select these features? Like how do you select your features? So so at this stage, we are just trying to gather any relevant features as possible based on our domain knowledge. For example, we know the infrastructure is related to human activity. So anything with the social economic features would be important. When we construct this infrastructure, we need to construct them on the land surface. So as the elevation change is also important. But there are also some features we actually didn't consider, such as the soil types, right? I'm not sure if the soil types will impact the topology or not. But inferring the unconsidered features from all the possible features would be almost impossible, because anything actually can impact your infrastructure topology. Even probably the preference of the administrator, they probably can even like affect the topology. But these factors we can only like first try to find the most relevant. And for the factors that's not very relevant, we don't know how to find it yet. But if we have a group of candidates, that's a different story. Like if we have 10 candidate factors and we want to find which candidate is most important, that is much more doable, much more manageable. Yes.
Any other questions?
So for the problem that you were discussing about predicting if two nodes should be connected, if there should be an edge. So in the social network, world, they do this quite routinely, right? They try to suggest new connections. You go to LinkedIn, you said this, you should be friends with these people. So have you sort of looked at some of those approaches for what you're doing?
Not yet. Kind of like too far away from civil engineering. But But at the very beginning, when we think about the architecture of this algorithm, we do think that hey, social networks can definitely benefit from it. But we also kind of like want to follow our like interest direction. Like, yeah, the feature is different.
I mean, I guess in the social network world, it's more of friend of a friend that has to be a friend, but that doesn't quite translate in your world. Thanks.
Any questions from folks online? If you need to ask, you can unmute and ask the question. Ginger?
So like like the last two pieces of work, right? You use the real data, power grid, right? And but in the previous, like in the motivational slides, you mentioned about for sensor placement, and do you have a real data or just only through the simulation?
It's basically a benchmark the simulation. So the software, the part of the reason is actually putting the sensors to a drinking water system is very difficult. We need so many permits need to apply, and the utilities simply don't want us to put anything in the water because the water is used for drinking. And so in that project, we use hydraulic simulation software. EPA it's developed by the Environmental Protection Agency, and it is used to design and planning the water drinking systems. So it's not a perfect simulation. It cannot fully represent the real world, but used as a benchmarking data is enough for publication at that time. Yes.
Thank you.
So yeah, the report card, the infrastructure report card that you started with was very depressing. So, but I see that like sort of at least the Buffalo neighborhood, like compared to Cleveland, like would have similar kinds of problems. Have you sort of tried talking to people here? Like, I mean, are there things that you can think of related to the cold weather here that you're interested in?
Yeah, that's one thing I'm working in. So just speaking, like talking to the utility is a different story talking with academia. Like, so because utilities need to consider a lot of factors, the responsibility, the liability, and so I'm working on that. And in the future, I hope I can talk with more utilities. Especially like, for example, we can say in one of the project, Cleveland Water Department is really very supportive. They opened their data to us so that we can have the capability to analyze the data to help them to predict the failure probability of the pipes. But it is also a high responsibility for the utility to open their data. So this is really a networking, a talking progress. So yes.
Thank you. And that's something maybe that IID can help sort of in trying to bring some of our community folks together to see like, I mean, what research is going on here and maybe find some connections, right? So
appreciate. That would be very appreciated.
What works in the IID like a display?
Yeah.
All right, so we had two very nice talks that were sort of connected in some sense, both related to networks of various kinds, biological and things related to infrastructure. So this again generated a lot of good questions. So if you have please tell your colleagues about this opportunity to talk about your research. We're always looking for more speakers. There's still 2 slots available this semester that we would like to fill, and we continue this every semester. So thanks again for all of you spending your time here with us. And